Alrighty then, so the next episode in this batch of summertime Steven Universe episodes was entitled Drop Beat Dad. This title, of course, being a reference to the term deadbeat dad. Something that I'm not gonna lie, and I'm sure I'm not alone, and I assumed Greg Universe was the first time we see him asleep in his van, but I'm getting ahead of myself. As we join the episode, Steven is helping out Sour Cream on his next DJing gig as a roadie, which, is kind of interesting to me, because as we've seen all throughout the show, Steven has an amazing musical acumen, yet here today he was just more than happy to be a roadie. I guess there's something to be said about him in terms of character when Steven only considers music and songs as something he does for himself and his friends and nothing he would do to, try and get famous or make money. Sour Cream has always been one of my favorite characters on Steven Universe, and I assume that has something to do with the fact that he's voiced by one of my favorite geeky comedians of all time, Brian Posehn, so any episode that focuses on him, I'm gonna be all for. Things get shaken up in Beach City with the return of Marty, Greg Universe's old manager who abandoned him in Beach City the night after he met Rose. Now Marty was a slimy snake in the grass the first time we met him, and very little has changed all this time later. He was using Greg back in the day, and once he discovers that his estranged son Sour Cream is a DJ, he is all too ready to try and exploit him as well. And I don't know about you, but the second we found out that Marty was actually the father of Sour Cream, I was pretty much already writing this episode in my head, and it went pretty much how I thought it would. Now pretty much everyone around can see that Marty is a talentless hack who is, leeching off his much more talented, much more artistic son, but no one wants to harsh Sour Cream's buzz either. Not the least of which Yellowtail, Sour Cream's stepdad, of whom he has not seen eye to eye with very much recently. But when Marty ultimately betrays his son and attempts to hijack his concert to help promote some sort of business dealing that he was involved in, it's actually Yellowtail who ends up coming to save the day. Sour Cream also gets a truly defining moment wherein he tells his father off, showing that he takes more after the stepdad who chose to raise him than the biological father who abandoned him. This family squabble, of course, being reflected a lot in Greg Universe and what's going on with him, his son, and the gems. Greg has a lot of shortcomings as a parent, but at least he stayed and he loves his son, and Steven, never wants for anything with Greg around. Perhaps the biggest revelation, though, of Drop Beat Dad comes in the final minutes when we discover that the only reason Marty came back to Beach City in the first place was because he was legally required to give a check to Greg. One for a whopping $10 million. At the end of the day, Drop Beat Dad was an okay episode. Not great, it's definitely more predictable than any episode of Steven Universe I can think of. But, predictable's not bad. I really dug the new age design for Marty. Sour Cream got some closure and got to finish up his character arc, what with him rebelling against his stepfather only to realize at the end that his stepdad was looking out for him all along. This is cool because, way too often in fiction, especially in media aimed at kids, step-parents are always getting thrown under the bus. Here, though, the stepdad ended up being okay, and the episode itself was ultimately okay, which is why I give it a 7 out of 10. Okay then, so I'm back again to cover more Steven Universe, and the next episode we got in this week's Steven Bomb was entitled Mr. Greg. Now, even before this episode was released, it was already getting touted by Cartoon Network and a lot of the different writers on social media as the big musical episode. Which, I don't know about you, but I found that kind of surprising. Oh really, Steven Universe, a musical? You don't say. It's not like they don't always have a lot of songs, but it's still impressive that, the whole 11 minutes is a musical. Now, as we join the episode, Greg Universe is a millionaire. His song, the song that actually got Rose to take notice of him in the first place all those years ago, was actually used for a hamburger jingle. The thing is, Greg has no idea what to do with his money, and honestly, that makes a lot of sense when you look at his character. Even when he was a working musician, he was all in it for the art and not for the money. Steven is equally unmaterialistic, and geez, what would a kid like that want when he already gets to go on magical adventures every day? They do, however, decide that maybe they should take a trip to the New York-inspired Empire City, and hey, how about Pearl tag along as well? No surprise, having Pearl and Greg that close together is just an awkward recipe for disaster. The Gems have always been a little dismissive of Greg, Pearl especially treating him with confusion and disgust most of the time. But she loves Steven like the mama bird she is, so she's willing to give it a try. At first, things go really well. They eat, they drink, they sing, they dance, they get awesome tuxedos, Pearl especially pulling hers off really well. But things take a very unfortunate turn when Greg gets a little too familiar and attempts to dance with Pearl. Again, you gotta keep in mind, for Gems, dancing is like the ultimate form of intimacy. It's the most personal and sacred thing you could ever do with another person. Dancing Dancing is their prelude to fusion, and fusion is literally becoming one with another person, mind, body, and soul. Greg danced with Rose all those years ago, and Pearl is still pretty resentful of it. This situation leads to Pearl busting out what might very well be one of the best songs they've ever done in Steven Universe's 3 seasons, and that's really saying something. It is a heartstring-tugging, gut-wrenching ballad, wherein Pearl lays bare all of her issues with Greg and all of the emotion she still has tied up in Rose. It also tells us a lot about the gem's history in just a few words. You see, as we find out, Greg was not the first human Rose took an interest in, and considering how long the crystal gems have been on Earth, there was probably a lot more before him. Pearl loved Rose, and she was always upset when she would run off with some human guy, but she knew at the end of the day, being a gem, she would be able to outlive them all, and she did, but Rose never came around to her and returned her feelings. But then Rose ended up falling head over heels with Greg and making the ultimate sacrifice so their son Steven could be born. Steven overhears what Rose was singing to herself, and this right here is amazing. He knows something is wrong, but because he's a child, he can't process all these super complicated emotions. Instead, he decides to counter this the only way he knows how, with another song, something to hopefully break down the walls that have been built up between Greg and Pearl. The theme of which being, hey, you both loved Rose, you both love Steven, maybe you should try and find some common ground with each other before you drive yourselves nuts. And you know what? It works. They find that common ground with each other and they dance. And yeah, that's pretty much Mr. Greg in a nutshell, and really, I can't think of any other way to say it than this was an instant classic. This show manages to tackle incredibly complex subject matter maturely and in only 11 minutes. Like Steven himself, I get the strong feeling that a lot of kids watching this episode now won't really get the severity of what happened until they're much older, and in a way that kind of makes it better. The songs are of course all wonderful, and like an opera here, they all kind of lead one into the next. Pearl gets some amazing character development here and really comes to terms with the fact that she had so much of her own being and self-worth tied up in Rose, and for her to move on, she's going to have to get past that and deal with those feelings. Greg is no slouch in this episode either. He's a character who's usually shown as being very bright, very happy, and very sunny regardless of the situation, but here though, we actually get to see him sad, get to see him with his feelings hurt. If you couldn't tell, I love this episode. It's moving, powerful, and deals with more complex emotions in 11 minutes than most shows do in entire seasons. I can't think of anything else to give it but a 10 out of 10. Seriously, if this one is not nominated for all the Annies, then I don't know what's up. Now, after a big episode like that, the next episode in the Steven bomb, entitled Too Short to Ride, calmed things down considerably. Steven is still desperately attempting to get Peridot to acclimate to Earth, and he hopes one way in which to get her to come out of her shell is to give her her very own tablet device. Oh no, Steven, don't give the super advanced alien life form access to Earth internet. She's gonna be seeing things she can't unsee in no time. It's clear that Peridot really missed her cybernetic enhancement, so she takes to this new tool with a gusto, and before you know it, she's twittering and social media-ing with the best of them. With that, Steven and Peridot, joined by Amethyst, decide that it would be a good idea to take in a day at Funland. This setting gave the show a blank check for all manner of shenanigans, my personal favorite, the return of Mr. Smiley, voiced by famous comedian Sinbad. He seems to be the only one who works on the entire boardwalk, a fact that is slowly but surely driving him insane. Now, being of the height-challenged variety, Steven, Amethyst, and Peridot run into a lot of difficulty over at Funland, but it's nothing that little gem shape-shifting can't cure. That is, of course, except for Peridot, who, as we find out in this episode, is actually unable to shape-shift, a skill that up until now we thought all gems possessed. Yeah, it turns out she's an Era 2 Peridot, and that with the homeworld slowly but surely running out of materials to make new gems, second generations lack a lot of the skills that the ones before them possessed. And that in and of itself opens up about a million really interesting questions. If all gems aren't created equal, does that cause some sort of rift back on the homeworld? I mean, as we already know, they have a really rigid caste system, so it would only make sense. Furthermore to that, is this the reason that the homeworld is so big into the colonization of other planets? Is it all about resources and materials, or is it about something much else? Furthermore, from what we've seen about gems and gem culture, they are nigh immortal for the most part as long as their gems don't get broken. What do you do in a society like that? Wouldn't it lead to a bunch of overcrowding, or is that why the gem homeworld is so into colonization, just to have enough space for its people? Too Short to Ride did not answer any of these questions, but you know, there were some good-hearted laughs at Steven and Amethyst trying trying their best to activate Peridot's powers. Steven even freaking himself out when he tries to body morph. As you'll remember, every other time Steven has tried to use his shape-shifting abilities, it's usually blown up in his face something terrible. It's clear that Peridot derives a whole lot of shame about this, inability of hers, and you kind of see that reflected in Amethyst as well, who we know isn't quite right by gem standards. Both are arguably defective, and maybe it's for those reasons that, they get along as well as they do. It's for that reason Amethyst tries harder than anyone else to get Peridot out of her shell, and it's that extra push that makes it so she's forced to activate her powers. Yeah, turns out Peridot is actually Magneto with the ability to control metal, go figure. Of course, she doesn't have mastery over these amazing new powers yet, but once she does, wow, she might actually be able to give Lapis a run for her money as the most overpowered gem. These new powers too turn out to be exactly what our heroes need to win Peridot's coveted carnival prize, which, is interesting that Steven was okay with this, considering that they basically cheated their way to victory. He's just usually always been shown as such a moral, upstanding kid. Then again, you could argue it's not cheating when you're using innate skills, and I mean, these are carnival games which are famously crooked anyway, so the moral of the story, kids, is it's okay to cheat if the game is already rigged. Too Short to Ride, in summation, was an okay episode. I mean, anything after Mr.Greg was going to seem, lackluster in comparison, but overall, I don't think this one is going to be making any top 10 lists anytime soon. We got some nice lore tidbits to chew on, and it's fun to see Peridot interact with Steven and the rest of the Crystal Gems when they aren't under threat of impending doom, but beyond that, there wasn't much to offer here. Overall, I would give this one a 6 out of 10. Now, from there, let's transition on over to the next episode in this summer 2016 Steven Bomb, and that episode was entitled The New Lars. It's been a while since the show has revisited the relationship between Sadie and Lars, this kind of will they, won't they thing they have going on. Now, Lars is a character who has always kind of stuck out in the show. He's rude, he's crude, he's abrasive, he's antagonistic. He's one of the few people who is out and out cruel to Steven, and the only reason that Steven lets him get away with it is because he's either too nice or what Lars is saying goes right over his head. We do, however, from time to time see the good in him, and at the end of the last episode with him and Sadie, it seemed like they were ready to take the relationship to the next level. So you can imagine my surprise when we start this episode off and it seems like he's fallen right back into bad habits all over again. He treats Steven like crap, and moreover than that, he treats Sadie like a doormat. Now, Steven, of course, has always been a big booster of the Sadie-Lars relationship, though try as he might, he can never seem to get them to connect. That is, however, while dreaming, he ends up accidentally quantum leaping into the body of Lars, yet another power he seems to possess now. This, I thought, was a really cool idea for the episode to take. Maybe if we actually see a day in the life of Lars through the eyes of Steven, we'll better understand where he's coming from and maybe why he's such a jerk. Only that didn't really seem to be the episode's intention, at least not at first. As we can see, Lars comes from a good home with a loving mother and father. He also seems to come from some money. We discover that he's a total slacker outside of work, failing school so much to the point that his parents are really starting to worry about him. The big joke of the episode is that everyone really seems to like Steven more as Lars than they actually liked the real Lars, whose name we find out here is actually Laramie. Lars, of course, is a character held down by a lot of insecurities. We're not exactly sure where these come from, but what we know for certain, though, is that when the very uninsecure Steven takes over his body, everybody likes him. That is, of course, except for maybe the most important person there is, and that is Sadie. You see, Steven in Lars's body attempts to profess love for Sadie that he's sure that Lars had. Of course, as Steven soon finds out, adult relationships are a lot less simple and a lot less black and white than he was making them out to be. Sadie rejects Steven in Lars's body, and moreover than that, she actually gets even more upset at the idea that Lars treats her one way in private but another way in public, as if he's embarrassed by her. Once the body switch has been found out, however, it's a race to return to Steven's body because no one actually knows where Lars ended up if Steven is in his body. As you might have guessed, this was yet again another recipe for some comedy shenanigans wherein everyone gets the wrong impression of Lars. Eventually, everything's put back the way it was, but Lars feels like a real idiot now, knowing that everyone preferred Steven hijacking his body to, well, him being himself. Sure, Lars might not be a great guy and suffer from quite a few personality flaws, but when you look at the big picture, he does sort of suffer more the effects of gem magic than just about anyone else in Beach City. I mean, having your body snatched has gotta be a pretty crappy situation situation and then to have your friends and family be audience to your breakdown, that's gonna mess with anybody's head. The big takeaway though from the episode is that Sadie was the only one who actually cared that Lars was missing. She, for all of his trouble, fell in love with him the way he is and not the way Steven was making him out to be. The new Lars was ultimately, at the end of the day, a decent episode. I feel it suffered from a lot of the same problems that Drop Beat Dad did in the way that it was ultimately kinda predictable. Up until now, Steven Universe has kinda stayed away from these after-school special E-type episodes, but now we've gotten 2 this season. Also, despite getting to sorta walk a mile in his shoes, I don't feel like I know Lars that much better. Still, if you're invested in the Sadie-Lars romance and wanted to see where that story was gonna go, I don't think you're gonna be disappointed by this one, which is why I give it a 7 out of 10. And with that, we have the final episode in this week's offering of Steven Universe episodes, and the episode was entitled Beach City Drift, an obvious reference to Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift and drift racing in general. Now, as we join the episode, we can see that Greg Universe has spent some of his $10 million on a new car. It's funny, I assumed he blew through all of that money in one episode. It's nice to know he still has some kicking around. Did he buy a cool new sports car with his money? Of course not, that just wouldn't be Greg. He bought himself a weird old junker, which suspiciously looks a lot like the car from Initial D. Ah yes, you all know Initial D, don't you everyone? That car racing anime about racing cars? Heck, I've never even seen Initial D and I knew how on the nose this reference was. Come to think of it, it's actually been a bit since Steven Universe has done some references and callouts. Beach City Drift also saw the return of Kevin. Yes, that's right, you all remember Kevin, don't you? That jerk from the first Stevani episode. Connie and Steven most certainly remember him. In fact, in a very uncharacteristic move, Steven is actually quite angry. He's held a major grudge for this dude. Kevin is in town to race the denizens of Beach City in his awesome new car, and Steven and Connie decide that maybe it's time they take a little revenge. Of course, they can't do it as themselves, so it's time for Stevani to make a return. Ah yes, Stevani, the lovable androgynous giant. Ronaldo by far probably got the biggest laugh out of me this episode because, well, he too realizes that this is all basically one giant Initial D racing anime riff, and of course he would, he's such an arch nerd. What follows is, well, a race, and that's about it. Again, I'm sure if you're a fan of the animes and shows that they're making reference to right here, you'll probably enjoy it. I'm not, so admittedly it did very little for me. There is something of a subplot here wherein Steven and Connie feel that perhaps they fused for all the wrong reasons in an attempt to get some sort of childish revenge, and how that was wrong, especially considering how important and sacred fusion is to gems. But they don't dwell on it for very long, maybe a minute. Ultimately, the message too here was kind of transparent. Hey kids, don't let your haters get the best of you. It's not a bad message by far, it's just, Steven Universe is usually a lot more complex in what it's laying down, and this, much like Drop Beat Dad, kinda felt like an after-school special. Overall, as much as it pains me to say, Beach City Drift is the first Steven Universe episode in a long time I didn't really enjoy. It wasn't bad, but it just didn't draw me in either. I know the writers absolutely loved Kevin as a character, and they had been chomping at the bit to try and bring him back, but his return didn't do a lot for the episode or for me. I mean, I suppose between him and Marty, season 3 of Steven Universe is becoming the season of the human antagonist, but overall that's really all the credit I can give. I would give this episode a 5 out of 10. Now, I hope you all have enjoyed the new way in which I'm formatting these Steven Universe reviews, and that is getting an entire week's worth of shows all covered in one video instead of a bunch of smaller videos throughout the week. In the comments section down below, be sure to tell me what your favorite episode from this week was, and I will be back again at the end of next week to review the next set of episodes. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching my newest video. I hope you enjoyed it, and while you're here, why not check out another video I have on offer, or maybe if you're feeling in a supportive mood, you want to like or subscribe. And if you want to support the creation of more videos just like this one, then please by all means check out the Kate Joel Patreon. A little bit goes a very long way, and I will see you all next time.